Peter Collier is the Energy Minister. I spoke with him earlier. Minister, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
When will you make a decision about the future of Verve and Synergy?
Look, there's no urgency, Andrew. There's simply no urgency, and we won't be forced into making a decision based upon the rantings of either the opposition or, in some instances, the business sector.
But I heard you this week say that it's a very real possibility. What does that actually mean?
That means we're considering it. There has been no formal work that has been done. There have been no investigations or reports at this stage. At the highest level, that is between the Premier and myself and some members of the Premier's office, there have been some discussions going on to ascertain whether or not it is a viable option and whether it is an option that we will undertake.
Is this policy on the run?
Not at all. Not at all, I can assure you.
But I mean, you've done no work. There's been no formal work, but we've heard hints from Premier Barnett about this. We have you sort of hedging your bets, saying it's a very real possibility, but we're not committed to it. It sounds like policy on the run, doesn't it?
It may sound that way, but it's simply not the case. We had a very forensic investigation in terms of Verve and Synergy. The Premier made his opinion quite clear going into the election and post the election that we were going to consider, and a very real consideration, of re-merging Verve and Synergy. Now, we've got Peter Oates, who has an enormous amount of experience in the energy sector, to do a forensic investigation. He came down with two recommendations. One was to merge, one was not to merge, but to make some significant changes to the market rules and the structure, which we have done. Now, what we're doing is we'll continue to monitor it, and I said that when I made the announcement that we would not re-merge about almost 2 years ago now, and we'll continue to monitor it, but it is a very real option.
Now, you launched the whole Strategic Energy Initiative process. Now, that process, I think we're a couple of years into it, still hasn't been finalised. How can you even consider a very big decision like that without that strategy in place?
Look, I think we've got to be careful that we don't get carried away with this issue. There's this notion, almost these dietitians of doom that suggest that, you know, if you're going to re-merge Verve and Synergy, it's the end of the energy sector as we know it. Well, that's just garbage, quite frankly, and people are portraying it as being the end of literally the end of the free market in energy. The Strategic Energy Initiative is a very bold and visionary document, and it traverses a whole raft of different areas in the energy sector.
But including this issue?
In terms of the market structure, it does, but that is but one part of it. It'll be the first time, Andrew, that we'll have had a visionary statement with regard to the energy sector since 1979, and it encompasses a whole range of areas: the network, the generation, the retail, the renewable component.
But I guess that's my point. Wouldn't you want that guidance as you made consideration, as you gave consideration to whether or not you merge these two entities?
Well, look, there is the suggestion that if you re-merge Verve and Synergy, it's the end of the free market, as I said, and it stifles private investment. Well, that is abject nonsense. If the Verve and Synergy...
The private sector seems to be saying that, though, don't they?
Well, quite frankly...
They spent a lot of this week saying exactly that.
Yeah, and I think, quite frankly, I disagree with the private sector. And I think, quite frankly, they're scaremongering, and what they say does not reflect reality. Now, we don't want to... the splitting up of Western Power, which I inherited, or the Liberal National Government inherited, was a manifest failure the way it was done.
Now, I presume a decision of this magnitude is not going to be a snap decision. So all this work that you say has not yet been done will be done before you make that decision?
I think, as I said, a lot of the preliminary work in terms of the options that were available for a re-merge was done with Peter Oates' document. So there has been a considerable amount that has been done. Re-merging Verve and Synergy is not the end of the world with regard to energy.
But if I could just stop you there, I presume Eric Ripper and Alan Carpenter would make the argument, and were making the argument at the time that you supported the breakup, that this was going to deliver certain benefits. Now, they had facts and figures too. They would say that a lot of the work had already been done. I mean, how do you stop this being a disaster in reverse?
Well, it certainly can't be any worse than what we inherited. And you mentioned... No, not at all, mate. Let me tell you. What we have got when we have Mr. Ripper and Mr. Carpenter, who you mentioned, constantly banged on about the fact that by separating Western Power into the four entities would lead to a lowering of electricity prices. Now, that has been an unmitigated disaster. We inherited a situation when we came to office in January of 2009. I got a document that said that we needed to have a 116% increase in electricity prices to get to cost-reflective levels. Now, if you think that that's a success of the separation of Western Power into the four entities, well, you're in dreamland.
Can I ask you about power consumers and politics then?
Sure.
Because one of the ways that this probably does make sense, the fact that you're just flagging this idea, is that politically it offers the prospect of a carrot and a stick, doesn't it? A carrot to the public, that there's at least the tantalising prospect that power costs might be held down, and a stick to beat the Labor Party from here to the next election. Is that what this is really about?
Not at all. We have no problems beating the Labor Party on energy. They were manifestly inadequate. They stuffed the system up, quite frankly, and that's exactly what we inherited, and I inherited as Energy Minister. We've made some significant changes over the last 3 years. As a result of the changes to the vesting contract between Verve and Synergy, we've saved West Australians $1.6 billion. So we have made some significant changes. It is nothing about that. What we're doing is looking at the prospect, with Verve and Synergy, the prospect of a re-merge. The combined purchasing power of a combined entity has real merit, and that's but one consideration that we need to follow on.
But irrespective of what you do, the bottom line for consumers, and people really need to understand and probably accept this, is that power prices are never ever coming down, are they?
No, I've got to be honest with you. At the moment we've got enormous pressure on power prices, not just generation costs, fuel costs, labour costs, and we also have the impost of a carbon tax coming on the 1st of July, which has nothing to do with the government. I've got to say it's a federal impost. But having said that, yes, we in Western Australia, believe it or not, are still relatively cheap in comparative terms with other jurisdictions throughout Australia. That's the simple fact of the matter. The cost of electricity has skyrocketed, but certainly the failed separation of Western Power into the 4 entities has not helped the process.
Minister, thanks for your time.
Thanks.